Welcome to the Engineering Manager podcast. I'm your host, Steven Tejamulia. Today we have a special episode called Pathway to CTO, Transitioning from Engineering Manager to Chief Technology Officer. Mark Eagle is a seasoned engineering manager, entrepreneur, and investor with over 30 years of experience in tech startup ecosystems and engineering management. He's here to share his journey and invaluable lessons he's learned along the way. So let's dive right in. Mark, great having you here as always. It's our second episode with you, back by popular demand, and your expertise has been awesome for our audience. So thank you for being here.
Thanks, Steven. It's always a pleasure chatting with you. Thanks for having me again on the show.
Oh, delighted. To kick things off, can you describe the key differences between the roles of engineering manager and a chief technology officer?
Sure. First, let me define the roles and then tell you what I do as CTO, because it might be a little different. And bear in mind with me to set the stage, and I promise I'll be a little more succinct as we go through a lot of the follow-up questions. But as you know, I love to tell stories, and stories usually get my point across and people have something to think about. So the engineering manager can have a variety of titles. They can range from a tech lead all the way up to a VP of engineering. And it's pretty well defined. They manage the team, they can hire and fire, they monitor the metrics, and the big one is they control the delivery schedule. And I know that's a bit oversimplified, but most of our audience has a good idea of what an engineering manager does. As those managers grow, they continue to enhance their tech knowledge and they have to grow their people skills. And then usually if they get to a certain level, they'll manage a budget, which they hate to do because they're engineering guys. So depending on the role and size of the organization, they could even write code. And I'll talk about that in a second. As to the CTO, there's a few flavors. In some companies, the CTO can be the lead architect, or in a real technical company, they can be that mad tech scientist that's always coming up with the next idea. But I'll talk about what I call a more common role these days. It's called the business CTO, and I'm more familiar with that. And that role has become more and more common, particularly over the last 10 plus years, because tech now is almost always customer facing, and you need to focus on that a little different than when you just had a CIO working with your ERP or internal systems. So the letters CTO stand for Chief Technology Officer, and the C is for Chief. And that implies a C-level or C-suite executive who has a seat at the table. And I know it's controversial, but most people with this title are not really a CTO. They're really a VP of engineering, and they don't have the C-suite experience. And that's where I come in. I went through all the roles. I was a developer, as project lead. I was at VP of engineering, and then finally the CTO. And at one point, I even ran a 200-person department and had the responsibility for all things that were customer and product related. So what I'm doing today and these days is I'm a fractional CTO advisor, but I can also roll up my sleeves. If I'm doing the real C-level work I usually only work with a customer from 2 to 5 hours a week, or I do a defined project. And what I enjoy most is advising and providing 30 years of expertise, and a lot of those in the C-suite. So I focus on those C skills of the CTO and help the CEO fill in those tasks that he may not have on staff. And then in the other fractional hours I do is just what roles that an engineering manager would do, but he doesn't have the bandwidth or the time. And so I just fill in the gaps. So let me go back to the topic and I'll talk about the differentiators of when you become a CTO. And to make that leap, it's your mindset. Your mindset becomes business oriented instead of tech oriented. The CEO is looking to you as the CTO to help define that technical business strategy. So this is where the skill sets start to change. You become really customer oriented. You become an evangelist. I started doing international travel and I started selling and closing deals. you start to think like a C-level executive in metrics instead of for business metrics instead of tech metrics. And everyone needs to determine for themselves if that's what the job they want, or some people just want to be a great VP of engineering. So to be a little more concrete, some of the tasks a CTO might do is define what an MVP you should build, define a company's roadmap, choose your outsourcing strategy, or a particular example is tell your CEO how you're going to use AI to change the business. And all those things are require collaboration with the business units using your tech skills.
No, that's great. That's a really good definition. You distinguish them very clearly. Now, one thing I'm interested to learn more about is what prompted you to go from an engineering manager, CTO, because there's some kind of passion and interest that helps people along that journey. But what was your transition?
Yeah, exactly. Once I could code fast enough and defect free, I found I couldn't scale myself. And scaling is really important to me. So, whether it's scaling business or just scaling myself. So I started managing teams and learning those skills. And it took me quite a few years, honestly, to stop coding. Technology, in and of itself, for me, doesn't turn me on. I was reading business books, I was reading psychology books, a lot more than tech ones. I started going to industry conferences. I was in the broadcasting industry and not as many tech ones. And stuff in the ad agency and broadcasting was a ton of fun. I got to see Super Bowl commercials before they were on the air. I got to see how they were put together. And so I constantly found opportunities to visit clients. And then a big one was my boss structured my compensation. So my bonus was tied to the business profitability. So therefore, I wanted to learn the business. And it honestly took me 10 to 15 years to learn how to build and execute great teams and become that VP of engineering that I talked about before. Once I got there, I needed my next challenge. So as we bought companies, I had to get better at the politics to stay on top and learn how to market myself and my team to get noticed more.
That's a good trend. That's a good it's a good case study of people trying to like the thought process of them moving from an engineering manager CTO. And if you could elaborate a little bit on the specific skill sets and mind shifts that are required from that coder to managing an engineering team. You mentioned them in the case studies, but can you illustrate a little bit more of like what do they need to learn? What's the engineering manager need to learn so that they can be effective at the CTO? What are the skill sets, mind shifts that they need to have?
Yeah, Stephen. The biggest mind shift for me was to start thinking business and not tech. And so I started to learn how to do all the functions of all the other departments, whether it's finance or marketing or sales. I started learning how to talk to customers. And so at customers, I started doing what I'd call consultative selling. I went on a ton of sales calls. And then I learned how to integrate companies. We went through a dozen mergers and acquisitions, and I got to integrate them, not just the tech part, but the people part. I learned what an MVP really needed to achieve. People toss that around. I learned about product market fit. And just on MVP and product market fit, I could spend 30 minutes on each of them.
Great. And I think we have some questions that are going to dive into those, and then another session coming up on MVPs, how to create MVPs. So as we look at a little bit broader scale at the role of CTO, how does the CTO's role align with the strategic vision, long-term technology planning within an organization, right? So we talked about the differences, engineering manager, CTO. We talked about, okay, these are the skill sets we need to learn to become a CTO. But if we go at a macro level, thinking about why, what kind of mindset, and then how does it help the organization? So give us some insight into that.
Yeah, to me it was simple, and it's why I wanted to be that CTO and not that VP of engineering. And to me, tech is just a means to an end. So real success in business is meeting the business goals. So if you don't understand the business goals, you can't define the tech strategy to meet them. So for an example, the number of pull requests you complete, that's just not important to the CTO or the board. They're going to look like you're from Mars. So that's the major mind shift for me between the CTO and the VP of engineering. Those metrics just change.
So understanding a little, so yeah, you're changing those metrics. You're aligning more with the success of the organization. You're actually getting compensated that way. In your transition from engineering manager to CTO, what were some of the challenges you faced that you had to overcome, and what how would that help the next person trying to do it as well? So what are some of those challenges?
Yeah, so the biggest challenge, I'll never forget that tough conversation that I had with my boss. As I said, I couldn't scale myself anymore writing code, and I wanted to manage people and I wanted to visit customers. And so I approached my boss and told him that, and he said that if he let me do those things, he would lose his best coder. So I smiled at him and said, well, that's going to happen either way then.
Mm.
And so that didn't really help our relationship, but it made my point. My first step was to become that engineering manager, um, and I had a code. My next focus was how to become an engineering manager and not code. And I'll argue that a CTO shouldn't write code, but I had to wear multiple hats for a really long time, both when I was a coder and an engineering manager, and then when I was a VP of engineering and became that CTO. And you just can't skip being in the trenches, uh, but you need to keep working and keep a focus on how you're going to get out of them. And if that's the career direction you want. Some people like to do that, like to be building, like to have their hands in things. That just wasn't me, and that's where my definition of a CTO is. That's not what a CTO should really be doing. Should be way more strategic than tactical.
So I love that, right? And that goes to my following question: is what advice do you have for to someone experiencing imposter syndrome? They're in that CTO role, but they're still in the coding world, and but they need to make that transition. What advice you have for them so that they can make that transition without getting too stuck in the mire of an engineering manager?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. And it took me a while, but I learned that the guy next to me was a bigger imposter than I was. I mean, his tech skills weren't really as good as mine, but I found that his self marketing skills were really better. And so one of the skills I had to learn was how to market myself better. And then as I went up the organization, how to market my team better. And then as I was out in the world, how to market my company better. So I started going to CTO meetups, and I also found that most of the attendees at those CTO meetups didn't do that job that I'm defining as a CTO. A lot of them had that title, but they were speaking in buzzwords and they were speaking in tech geek speak. And so they were techies. They got promoted to the manager, then they got promoted to a director. And so I was determined to learn the skills that I didn't have to get to that real business guy, the real CTO, to get into the C-suite. I didn't want to just find another company that would give me a CTO title, but I'd be doing the VP of engineering job. I wanted to be in the thick of things. I wanted to be invited to board meetings, and I wanted to be part of the company.
Okay, I like that. I like that approach. You're from what you're sharing is really hands-on, and you're learning a lot. You're improving yourself, and you're realizing, and you're teaching us the differences. That's great. So how do you balance, like now that you've gone through and you're a CTO, how do you balance maintaining technical expertise while focusing on strategic decision making as a CTO, so that your technology prowess doesn't go away over time? How did you make that balance?
Yeah, for me, I knew I didn't want to code anymore. And over time, you are going to lose that ability to build with your own hands. The technology keeps changing. The languages that I could code in and built lots of software with, they're just not popular today. So you just have to figure out that way to stay technically relevant. And also, you have to be okay with that. You're no longer going to be building software. If you're a CTO and then you go home and you start building software, you're not going to be spending any time with your family. So if you really need to keep building and want to be hands-on, then I'd suggest that you find a startup that wants you to build a product for them. They'll give you the CTO title, I don't you probably won't be doing CTO work, but you'll have the title and you'll be building stuff. I prefer other challenges, and I find people. I find those guys that want to stay up all night and build stuff. But you do need to stay current with innovation. Let me give you a particular example. AI is a huge thing coming in. I'm sure you'll be doing lots of segments on AI coming up. You need to understand AI. You need to understand where it's going. You need to understand at least what an LLM is. And you need to follow the trends and the experts. But what you don't need to do as a CTO, in my opinion, is you don't need to be able to code to the API to get it to work. So there's the distinction for me.
No, thanks for explaining that. Now, if we look at an engineering manager today who's preparing himself to become a CTO in the future, what kind of steps would you outline that he should do? And you stated a lot of good ones so far, but if you had to say, summarize, here are some steps to take to prepare yourselves for that position, what would they be?
Yeah, Stephen, I think I covered a lot of that, but I would start going to sales meetings. You're going to learn a lot about the business and the customers, and people by going to sales meetings. And I also would recommend going to customer conferences. Also on the tech side, and for that imposter syndrome side you talked about a little, find CTO groups. I joined a group called CTO Connect. And ironically, they changed the name over time to be called Geeks Who Lead. It's kind of an interesting name. But every one of those CTOs has a story of how they got to their position. Some are decision makers, some are senior architects. Not everyone like me wanted to be that business guy, but they can help you out there quite a bit. They'll help you. Some people love to be that VP of engineering. If you go to a company and their team is big enough, a VP of engineering has quite a bit of power. They're not as business minded, and they're focusing on a lot of team stuff and have a lot of meetings. So that wasn't for me. So that's a route you might want to go. Or you can go to a company that's smaller, where you have to fill a lot of hats, and you may be able to do some of that. But when I wanted to work 80 hours a week, that was great. But if you want to have a normal life, then you want to pick a job where you can do that job and not start doing other people's jobs. And that's, again, where I feel the CTO has to be involved with strategy, with customers. They have to be willing to give up that hands-on, let me build stuff, at least as part of their job.
That's good. And in addition to that advice, a little angle that I would like to dive into here. Can you share some strategies for cultivating effective communication and leadership skills as a CTO? So besides technical desire, customer focus, how did you cultivate your communication and leadership skills?
Yeah, so I got a degree in industrial psychology as well as computer science. So I love helping people grow. I do tons of mentoring and advising and things like that. I also read a lot. So I highly recommend getting mentors and as I talked about before, going to those conferences. And a key thing that you'll learn is how to bridge that gap between technical and non-technical people. And you always want to just speak in the language of the audience and avoid lots of buzzwords, particularly if you're talking with executives or customers or even the guy down the street who asks you what you do for a living.
Right, that's good advice there. And also, I think just throughout what you've explained, lots of practice throughout your career, right? Getting to where you want really helped out to develop those skills. Um, Another one I had here is, how does one navigate the shift from hands-on technical work to more strategic work and less technical approach? For those struggling with, I do want to build, I want to be a CTO for, how do you navigate that shift?
Yes, so you want to be successful in your role. So to me, it was understanding the things that the CEO cares about. He does,
Good
as I
one.
talked about before, he doesn't care about how fast your pull requests are or any of those things. If you read Accelerate, it talks about all the DORA metrics. VP of engineering love that stuff. CTOs couldn't spell Dorometrics. So you have to learn how to learn what those things are. You have to delegate, and then you have to learn how to delegate your tech tasks. That means you have to mentor people instead of just doing everything yourself. And that's a really big challenge for a lot of engineering managers because you want to develop people that are better than you at building the tech. And not everyone can do that.
That's a great point. That's a great point. Looking at your career, what were some pivotal milestones in your career transition to a CTO, and how did that contribute to your success?
Yeah, so I was lucky to be involved in about a dozen mergers and acquisitions, and I earned the trust of the CEO to take charge. So how do you earn that trust? I beat budgets, but you do things like keeping customers that have complaints away from the CEO. I also created revenue. I signed deals. I became really visible. I really wanted to be that C-level guy, and not that backroom engineering guy. So you get into the boardroom and you pay attention. First, you are really quiet and you learn the skill of listening. Then you add a couple of words of wisdom, and then you get to the point where they look at you for the wisdom. And my boardrooms had people like Paul Hobby, whose father is who Hobby Airport is named after. I love to tell stories, so I had a guy on my board that worked for KKR, a big investment firm, and he did the R.J. Reynolds deal. There's a Lifetime movie about him called Murder in the Hamptons, and that's a
Hmm.
fun story in and of itself. I had a board member that called George Steinbrenner for my car. These guys have incredible Rolodexes. They have incredible expertise, and they're smart. So pay attention to them, listen to them, learn from people that are smarter and more experienced than you. And then on the flip side, I've had some really bad bosses. It's not like my career's been a panacea, and bad bosses can teach you a lot. So just pay attention.
No, that's good advice. Now, for as people are looking to become CTOs or thinking about that path, how important is mentorship for individuals aspiring to move into more senior roles in technology leadership? So you explained it to your bosses, and that's a good one. But is there other opportunities, and how important is that?
Yeah, I can't emphasize it enough. Find some great technologists and great leaders, and find people that are willing to help you. And remember that you're in charge of your career. And the biggest thing I see as a weakness in engineering managers is they don't want to ask for help. And just learn how to ask for help. That's a strength.
Sounds good. And you mentioned that really does help. Even I guess even the bad ones, you can see from their example and learn from those. Um, can you discuss the role of continuous learning in transitioning from engineering manager to CTO? And from your example, you've been always learning. You're always learning. How important is that?
Yeah, don't ever stop learning. I still don't. I learn everything. I learn something new every day. Stay current with trends. Go to seminars. You have to learn something about politics, and that's why I started doing startups. I thought there wouldn't be as much politics, but I was wrong. Um, but there's always a ton to learn. Just keep learning.
Very good. And you mentioned what is that website you mentioned again that really was helpful? As you were transitioning to CTO. Let's see here.
Oh,
Okay.
I joined a group called Geeks Who Lead.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
Geeks Who Lead. I have to go check that one out after this one. Geeks Who Lead. Um, what advice would you give to engineering managers aiming to empower their teams and delegate responsibilities effectively? You mentioned that before, and now as they're transitioning in their leadership skill and want to become more leadership, what advice do you have for them to learn how
Yeah,
to delegate?
look up the platinum rule. Everyone knows what the golden rule is. Do unto others as platinum rule flips the paradigm. I'll paraphrase it. It's do unto others what they want. In other words, give people what they want. Hire good people. Demonstrate your own competency to them. And remember, no one likes to be micromanaged. Create metrics for them that matter, and figure out how to reward them so that they feel valued. It's really that simple. I mean, it's not simple in practice, but the concept is pretty simple.
Love it. Well, those are great steps. A few more questions here that I have for you. What steps did you take to collaborate with other C-suite executives to align technology initiatives with the organization goals? And this is more of as you become a CTO and you now have to collaborate with other C-suite executives. What steps did you take?
Yeah, so always try to be in the room when important discussions are being made. Have your colleagues' backs no matter what. Uh, you don't want someone stabbing you in the back, and the best way to do that is by making them look good. Be prepared to fight with the CFO on just about every number and everything, but always have your numbers and be able to justify them. And then make salespeople your best friends.
I love it. Now, we've talked a lot. You've given a great advice, tons of advice on people wanting, as people transition from engineering manager to CTO. Are there any skills that we didn't highlight that you think we should, that are crucial to the journey from engineering manager to CTO that you'd like to highlight?
I'm going to jump into some of those skills and advice for engineering leaders. And I had to write these down because there's a lot of stuff. And so I just wanted to give these as takeaways from our conversation. I talked about a lot of these, but get a mentor or a bunch of mentors and listen to them. Find some mentors that are really tough, that'll grill you. Having just a bunch of friends as your mentors doesn't work. Observe great leaders, and then if you can find one that you can work for. If you have a great leader or mentor, boss, uh, you'll learn a ton. Uh, then identify your own gaps and continuously learn how to fill them. And as I said before, be willing to ask for help. And then those soft skills, how to communicate, how to negotiate, speaking the language of non-technical people. That's another skill there. Getting well networked. I can't speak enough about networking in terms of career building, and attend conferences if you can speak at them. If you can't speak at conferences, do podcasts. Uh, find CTOs that you admire and meet with them. Don't be afraid to ask for them. They're just people. You'd be amazed how many people, particularly tech guys that got to the top, will be happy to help you. It's a really friendly community. As I talked about before, go visit customers, learn about the business. And this is a hard one. Continue to figure out what you love to do. If you're doing, what did they say? If you love what you do, you won't work a day in your life, some kind of goofy quote like that. Learn what the CEO wants and do those things, and try not to work for jerks. And above all, have fun.
No, that is a great list. I'm going to document those. We're going to post those out with our blog post after this episode. Those are good takeaways, Mark. Now, I want to give you one more chance here because you do mentor and consult for CTOs, CEOs, helping people start business. Give us a little plug for your services and how you help people.
Yeah, so I call myself a fractional CTO, but what I do all day is help organizations fill in their gaps. And that could be an advisor for any of the kind of things we've talked about, so far, or if there's a particular initiative that a VP of engineering or director, or it depends on the organization structure, what the titles are. But if there's initiatives they can't get to, or there's skill sets that they just don't have, then I'm your guy because I've been there, made tons of mistakes, and I can fill in those gaps and get things done. So that's what I do all day: is find the CTOs who have gaps and partner with the VP of engineering, or partner with the CEO, or partner with the sales guy, to use high level technical skills to help a business grow.
Fantastic. Mark, thank you for sharing your invaluable insights with us today and your experience. To our listeners, thank you for joining us for this enlightening journey through the world of technology leadership. Don't forget to tune in to our next time for our podcast at the Engineering Manager community. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Stephen.